Previously on Returning to Runescape, and Robin Hood can kiss my ass. Then it was on to Draenor Manor to save a recently transformed individual from the life of being a poultrygeist. Ah, see what I did there? Aha, you are killed, boy. Time to slay us a dragon. And not any dragon, Elvarg. And we're finally going to take on all the hardest challenges that this game has to offer. Hey boys, we got ourselves another episode in the journey towards accomplishing everything that I set out to do when I was a kid. Let me start off by saying the positive reaction you guys have had to this series has been nothing short of inspiring to keep pushing forward. I appreciate every single one of you guys. Now, before we get all mushy and you start to make me cry, let's get back to business. In this episode, I set out to accomplish quite the list of adventures. So without any more delay, let's hop on in and let's see what trouble I got myself into this time. Hey, can you guys off? Can't you see I'm trying to shoot an intro here? Now that I had earned my place into the ranks of being a legitimate dragon slayer, I found myself wanting more. I had a bloodlust to slay any and all of those fire-breathing lizards. So I did some research, and I found two possible candidates that I felt I could overcome at this time. The green and the blue dragons. However, the greens, they were a little bit weaker, but they were also out in the wilderness, and I still have nightmares of what used to happen to me as a kid when I went out there. So I didn't really feel confident enough just yet. Plus, on the other side, the blues also had a cheeky little safe spot, so I could do it with little to no risk. Thankfully, when I was down here earlier killing chaos druids forever, I actually did a big brain play and I grabbed a dusty key. So we made our way down with the dusty key in our inventory and our range gear on, and we made our way over to the dragons. But not before being assaulted by an extremely aggressive chaos dwarf. If I'm being honest, I didn't blame him. You could smell the alcohol on his breath, and he was obviously drunk, and I figured word of my infamous past had managed to reach even this far. And I still hold a deep guilt for what I did on my journey as a young slayer. But nevertheless, I pushed forward and I made it through the gate. And once through the gate, I ran like a field mouse under the nose of my hungry cat. And I made it to the safe spot and I started my career as a dragon slaying SOB, boys. The kills were slow, very slow, but I didn't care. I was happy to be saving the world of RuneScape one dragon at a time. There was, however, something gnawing at me. Mostly because I'm lazy. I was having to pick up my bolts endlessly, and noting that I already had all the requirements, I accepted it was time. It was time to do animal magnetism. So we gathered all the resources required, and we made our way over and we started animal magnetism. And thank God for the RuneScape wiki telling me ahead of time to do the Ghost Ahoy quest, so that I had access to that ecto file. I was honestly able to make pretty quick work of this quest, and I even caught a glimpse of my childhood hero, Cal 1337 Killer. That boy hasn't aged a day in the last decade. And after I saw him and finished up the rest of the requirements, I returned back to Draenor Manor and handed in the quest. And with that quest out of the way, and my new handy dandy backpack chicken, who was willing to do the legwork for me of picking up my bolts and arrows from now on, I knew it was time to begin training for my trials, the Fremennik trials. I knew after I finished the trials, I was going to do the other quest, the Isles, so I could get this badass helmet and pretend I was Thor. So I figured it best to just get the hardest skill requirement out of all the quests done, 40 agility. Now, thankfully, I know, agility, thankfully, I saw in the wiki to not be a dummy over in Brimhaven anymore and go and try my hand at the rooftop courses. So that's what I did. And my God, boys, what a world changer this was. You know, honestly, up to this point, I would rather have burning hot cocoa sear a hole in my tongue or molten pizza rolls explode on the first bite rather than train agility. But now, it honestly wasn't so bad. And before I knew it, I was 40 agility. Next on the list was Herbler. And man, this one was actually pretty easy, but extremely expensive. So expensive, I almost thought of selling my body on the Grand Exchange in exchange for the herbs. But I had a little bit of pride left at this point, so I restrained. And after a few 100,000 coins gone, I was 27 Herbler. Remember earlier when I said I didn't want to go to the wilderness, like 2 minutes ago? Yeah, well, apparently this guy had other plans in store for me. I was asked to put my dragon slaying abilities to the test, though, and slay 80 of these overgrown iguanas. So, me, being the dragon slayer that I am, I obliged. I let out a sigh, and to the wilderness we went. And I'm not gonna lie to you boys, I was scared. I was very scared, but I wasn't gonna let that fear stop me from progressing any longer. So off to the wilderness I went. I grabbed my games necklace and I teleported my ass to the Corporal Beast lair. And before I knew it, I was out in the wilderness. And you know what? It wasn't horrible. Even though every noise had me nervously looking over my character's shoulder, and I was waiting for some 12-year-old kid to come out of nowhere and exterminate me. But I guess luck was on my side that day. Before I knew it, I had arrived, and I was face to face with the dragons I was assigned to kill. Now, although they were weaker than their blue-skinned cousins, like I said before, they were still very much so a formidable foe. And specifically because I felt like I was made out of paper when I was in my ranging gear. And there was no safe spot either. So, I did what any under-leveled person had to do. And I kept going in and out of their attack range, like the little that I am. And it was slow, boys. Not as slow as the blue dragons, but it was slow. But it worked. And after what felt like a couple hours and a few trips to the bank and back, which thankfully I received a loot bag, which was awesome, I have to say. It could have been a much worse task and taken a lot longer. And before I knew it, I had finished it. All right, boys. After finishing that task of green dragons, I got a little cocky. And I felt like there wasn't a dragon alive that could stop me. And I had to put my ego to the test. And I took on the single strongest creature that I've faced to this point. Black dragons. With some research, I found out the location of their den, which thankfully was just a little bit down from the blue dragons. And after making my descent, and I passed some very aggressive demons, spiders, and monks, I had arrived to another safe spot. And thank God for this safe spot, because even a dragon slayer of my caliber would be toast in mere seconds to these incredibly strong creatures. After a back and forth struggle that rivaled battles spoken about in any work of fiction known to man, alright, not really, I just hid in this corner for like half an hour until I finally killed one. I then realized I was not even remotely strong enough to consider fighting these behemoths efficiently. After coming to terms and realizing that my abilities were going to need to be honed a lot if I was going to ever be able to kill these guys efficiently, I decided it was time to put down my weapons and my armor and enjoy myself a drink. Honestly, a lot of drinks. I was going to do the Alfred Grimhands pub crawl. And that way, by finishing that, I could also finish the quest Horror from the Deep and get me one of these bad boys. Now, I may not be the world's best reader, but I sure as hell was going to look a lot smarter with this book in my hand. And in order to get one of those in my hand, I needed to get drunk as hell and prove my worth to a couple barbarians. So that's what I did. I traveled all over RuneScape. I visited various pubs, taverns, and some dive bars until I'd gotten all my signatures proving I was just as much of an alcoholic as the next guy. Once I guzzled down that last drink and I fought the barkeep to hand me back my teleports, I knew it was time to prepare for another trip to the wilderness. Because in order to finish this quest, I was going to need to unlock overhead prayers. So, with a little bit of research, a lot of hope, and a really puckered butthole, I made my way to the Chaos Altar. So once I reached the Chaos Altar, carrying nothing on me but the bones of my slain enemies, so that I could sacrifice them to a dark god to have my prayers answered for protection from my future enemies. Man, I can't believe my mom let me play this game when I was 9. This is some pretty morbid shit, boys. But the experience doing this was astounding, and I couldn't believe it. And before I knew it, I was level 44 prayer, and I had full access to the overhead prayers. I felt one step closer to being a real hero, and now that I had those, it was time to take on the Horror from the Deep. Honestly, I love this quest. It had some pretty heavy elements of H.P. Lovecraft, and it had some pretty suspenseful diary entries. Overall, I had a pretty good time. Except for this fucking rock jump. I literally failed like 9 times in a row. It even cost me like 3 of my lobsters. But I'll let it go. It's fine. I'll let it go. All of a sudden, I was in the fight of my life against a ravenous sea creature that was looking to kill and eat me. Now, the first sea creature that appeared, the fight was pretty simple enough. I just hid in a corner and I used my range abilities to take him down. But it wasn't until the real threat appeared that I was actually going to have to make use of those newly acquired prayers I had just gotten, along with learning to switch up my attack styles on the fly due to her changing invulnerabilities. But after a back and forth battle, really there was no battle, I just had my range prey on, eventually killed her. The mother monstrosity drew her last breath, and with that, I was rewarded my fancy new book to hold, so people would stop questioning whether or not I was smart. Now, with that fancy book in hand, it was time to get onto our real original goal, finishing the Fremennik Trials. But first, I was still lacking in my abilities of crafting and fletching, so it was back off to the Grand Exchange to buy the needed materials in order to progress those skills. And I tried my hand at gem cutting now, And my god, boys, was this so much easier than creating a bunch of leather bodies. I honestly couldn't believe the difference in cost and experience rates. Leching, on the other hand, still kind of sucked. But nevertheless, like the good gamer I am, I progressed regardless of my enjoyment. Grind over fun any day, boys. Any day. And now, boys, it was upon us. The moment we've all been waiting for. It was time to take on the trials of becoming a Fremennik boy. No, a Fremennik man. So I gathered my resources needed for the quest, and I teleported to Camelot. I was scared, but excited to prove my merits to the barbarians of the north. I made my way to their encampment. There, I was given the task of proving my worth to 7 of the council members on the Fremennik board. Thinking to myself, man, I wish this was America. I'd have just bought these guys off and been on my way. But it's not. So I began my task of showing these fine, esteemed men and women of the council my worthiness of joining their clan. Everything seemed to be going along rather nicely. I used trickery to fool the local drunk into thinking I could keep pace with him. I even convinced a troll that rocks made good stew, so that he would give me a strand of golden fleece so that I can make an enchanted lute that allowed me to play like John Mayer and drop all of those barbarian panties. Everything was actually coming along rather nicely. Until this happened. Alright, let me preface this by saying, I'll admit, I'm not the smartest tool in the shed, but holy crap, boys, did I drop the ball on this one. I went around asking every single one of these guys about this stupid flower, because I thought it was just a random, oh, one of these people is going to have the flower, you just have to ask them all until you find out which one has it. I spent 10 minutes running around here, trying to ask each one and see if they had the flower, until eventually I figured out that it was going to be a long list of favors that I had to do that eventually circled back around to you getting the flower. I felt pretty stupid, but eventually I got the damn flower, and I started progressing through the other tasks, and everything was back on track, boys. We were going to be accepted into the clan in no time, and then I got to the final task. I just have to say, kudos to the people who figured this out without the help of a guide or before guides were out. I would be here literally forever if not for a guide. Like, if the human race's survival counted on me figuring this out, we'd be fucked. We'd all be fucked, boys. Clicking on dragons? Sure, I'm your dude. Catching lobsters? Let's do it. This? Nah, fuck this. But finally, the struggle bus had came to its final stop, and this passenger that got off was not the same scared little boy that gotten on. Now, I was a Fremennik man. Boys, we did it. We finished the quest. So, now that I have that done, I think this is the best spot of any to end this episode. Now stay tuned for more episodes coming to a YouTube recommended near you. I also want to give a big shout out to everybody who's subscribed and given me tons of feedback and encouragement. You guys are the real MVPs, and I love you all. In the next episode, we're going to attempt to further our Fremennik journeys and become a little mini Thor while also continuing our Slayer journey. And I hope to see you all in the next one.